I can't wait to tell you all about the end of the story, which was culminated on July 13th, week before last, in National Statuary Hall. And I had the honor of watching the statue being moved into the US Capitol at night on July 8th. So it was a little anticlimactic for me in the sense on the 13th, although it was incredibly special. My work had been done at that point because she stood proudly in National Statuary Hall without incident. One of the things that I said as I spoke in National Statuary Hall was that Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune said that loving your neighbor is one of the noblest tenets that you can live by. And she said loving thy neighbor means being interreligious, international, and interracial. And so I think she would feel very much at home here with all of you at the Universalist Church, with what you believe in is absolutely what she believed in too. So you're very much aligned with her, and she's very much aligned with you and aligned with me, as a matter of fact. So I can't wait to tell you a little bit about the statuary process. I'll sort of go quickly because there's a lot to it, and I don't want to put you to sleep, but I also want to tell you the story. Yes. And the commemorative magazine that I've given to all of you, and I left some extra copies in the back, also tell this magnificent story. But let's begin with a little bit of the history. So who has been to the US Capitol? Most everyone. Okay, so you know that when you walk into the US Capitol, under the big dome is the rotunda. And in that rotunda are a selection of statues. Those are presidents of the United States, but many of them belong to the states in terms of being a part of the state collection. So in 1864, one of the congressmen, Merrill was his last name, Morrill, I guess I should say it correctly, Morrill, I believe is how you pronounce it. He said, let's fill our Statuary Hall, the chamber to the left as you're walking in from the rotunda. Let's create a place in which the states can honor the greatest people from their states by honoring them with 2 choice statues from each state. But in 1933, Statuary Hall, that had formerly been the House Chambers, was really overrun with statues, and so they began to spread them out across the entire Capitol. So they range from being in the Visitor Center to the Hall of Columns to Statuary Hall, and then there are some of the state's collection in the rotunda, and those are states whom have chosen as one of their greatest people in their histories as a president of the United States. So you have Ohio's President Garfield in the rotunda. You have California's President Reagan in the rotunda. But then next to it in that beautiful Statuary Hall is where Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune now resides. And so just sort of moving forward, I've kind of shared with you some of this, but just moving forward, one of the interesting things that happened in our history, really thankfully, it happened in about 2000, 2003, there was this big discussion by states that said, hey, wait a minute, we want to rethink who we have representing our states. So isn't that wonderful, right? And it's particularly wonderful for people like me who feel that there's no place for a Confederate general or soldier in National Statuary Hall or in the US Capitol. So, it's a personal bias, but I feel free to share that with you. So in the state collection, these 100 statues, 2 from each state, there were states that said, someone who was a wonderful part of our history, but we have someone else who we'd like to represent us now. And California really led that charge with President Reagan. They said, we'd really like to replace one of our statues with President Reagan. Well, Kansas said the same thing with Eisenhower. And now Kansas is saying the same thing with Amelia Earhart, believe it or not. And Nebraska said, we want Chief Running Bear to represent us because he did so much regarding the relationships between the Native Americans and the Western settlers. So it's been a long time coming, but in 2003, they passed a legislation and created replacement guidelines so that states could in fact replace their statues. And then that's become a movement. What really was the catalyst for the movement to replace the Confederate symbols in our country that stand to represent all of us, and not all of us align with those ideals, was the horrific massacre that occurred at the AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. And if you remember that in 2015, people started to really rethink people started to ask each other to rethink what our symbols in the US, in America mean, and do they represent all of us in America? And so this is a little diagram of the Capitol. So you can see, I don't know if I have a pointer on here or not, but you can see where my arrow is. That's the area of National Statuary Hall. And you can see it's just a magnificent area of the US Capitol. And so we had two statues representing all of us for the last 100 years. We had General Kirby, Edmund Kirby Smith, who really had no ties to Florida except that he was born here. He was born in St. Augustine. He moved away to go to boarding school. He joined the Confederate Army and fought for the Confederate Army in Texas. He was the last Confederate general to surrender. When he surrendered, he escaped to Cuba so that he wouldn't stand on trial. And then when he fled back into the United States, he went to Tennessee. So he never returned to Florida. So he really had, you were really hard pressed to say he's representing the greatest of who we are. And so, out the door. But John Gorey, bless his heart, we're all sitting here in this nice, lovely air-conditioned area, and we have him to thank. And John Gorey, who was a physician, was considered the father of air conditioning. And so I'm guessing that he will stay because we all remain thankful to this day for a cool environment. The interesting thing and the sad thing about John Gorey is he died penniless. He died, humiliated because he was very criticized for his patents and inventions and the work that he did. He was not appreciated at all. And so if he could only see, that he's been recognized now, and we're grateful, of course, for his inventions and patents. And so let's talk a little bit about bringing the statue to fruition. It really is a great story. It began in 2016, actually, when the legislature here in Florida voted to change our statue of Kirby Smith to someone of significance in our history. And so this was the process. Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune was chosen to go to the Capitol. Dr. Gorey was moved to another place in the Capitol. It's a beautiful place. He's right in the south entrance of the Capitol. That's one of the main four entrances. You have a north, south, east, and west entrance. You walk into that hall of columns, which is a beautiful space, and he stands proudly near the entrance. And so then Kirby Smith was placed in storage available upon request to see at the Museum of Florida History. So that is where he resides. So let's see here, there we go. So this was the real significant legislation. In 2016, Governor Rick Scott passed signed the bill that went into law when our legislature voted to replace the statue. So that was huge. That was a big day in the state of Florida for that to happen. And one of the other things that happened then was they passed legislation to say, okay, let's create a process to determine who is the greatest Floridian in our history to take the place of Kirby Smith. And so there was a process that was facilitated by the Florida Division of Culture and Arts. And there were 3,587 submissions, 259 unique names. Mary McLeod Bethune received 1,200 votes, by far and above, more votes than anyone. Some of the other contenders were Mr. Jenkins, the founder of Publix. There were some others that were, Nora Hurston, the poet and author. She was one of the candidates. So there were some other civil rights candidates that had bubbled up to the top, and some others. Walt Disney had even been put in there for Disney World, although he was originally and lived permanently in California. So some, I think, were discounted off the bat, but Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune just bubbled up to the top in a significant way. And so then on February of 2018, our legislature, the Florida legislature, voted to support Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune to represent all of us as one of our greatest Floridians. That was signed in 2018 by Governor Scott, and then that following year, on her birthday, July 10th, 2019, Governor DeSantis had taken over by then, and he signed a resolution to the Library of Congress asking them to remove Edmund Kirby and replace that statue, or allow the state of Florida to donate to the statuary collection the statue of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And so these are just some of the things that I've already mentioned to you, and I'll just move forward by saying that for any of you that are not aware of this, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune represents the first African American isn't that amazing, in the U.S. Capitol. She's not the first woman, she's the 10th woman. And there are some remarkable women that are also in Statuary Hall. And it's a remarkable opportunity to study the women who represent different states in the U.S. Capitol, because they've all done significant contributions to our country and to their state. She is also the first African-American woman to be sculptured by the first Puerto Rican master sculptor. So Nilda Comos was a beautiful woman, is inside and out, is the master sculptor, originally from Puerto Rico. She has a studio in Fort Lauderdale. And I think that that's a beautiful symbolism that they chose a master sculptor from Florida, and a woman master sculptor, and a minority master sculptor to sculpt Mary McLeod Bethune. She's also the only sculpture in the U.S. Capitol that's in a cap and gown. And when you see her, she has presence. She absolutely has presence in the U.S. Capitol. She's as tall as you could possibly be. You're allowed an 11-foot height limit, and she was a robust woman, and so she has that space. And then to be in that gorgeous statuary marble holding that beautiful black marble rose, it's just breathtaking, and it's absolutely noticeable when you walk into Statuary Hall. And so just a little bit about your local supporters. We had over 460 individual donations. We have a board of directors that I love to share are men, women, Republicans, Democrats, older adults, younger adults, Black, brown, and white Americans. You know, we're the fabric of America, and I'm very proud of that. We have representatives from Bethune-Cookman University. We have representatives from the leadership in Daytona, like Mayor Derrick Henry. So it's a beautiful mix of individuals very committed to bringing this project to fruition. A little bit more about the Statuary Fund. We were charged with raising the money. They said it would take about $400,000. We've raised just under $1 million, and we expanded our vision from creating the statue for the U.S. Capitol to also creating a statue in bronze that will be unveiled on August 18th. You're all welcome to join us, 9 a.m. at Riverfront Esplanade in downtown Daytona Beach. We've also worked to bring the statue to Daytona Beach. Did any of you happen to see it when it came to Daytona Beach? Yeah, oh, wonderful. So we had 15,000 people, particularly a lot of students in the Volusia County school system, come to the News Journal Center to see the statue. So we created an exhibit. We had a ticketing process. I mean, it was a huge, huge effort for October, November, December of last year. But I believe we're the only state to bring a statue from its place of origin, which is Pietrasanta, Italy, to its home city, Daytona Beach. Then we took the statue to her birthplace in Maysville, South Carolina, and then we brought her to the U.S. Capitol. So after December 17th, I loved being able to say that she's in a secure, undisclosed location in Metro DC. That was really music to my ears to know that she was safe and sound up there. Because it was dicey, you know, moving a statue that's priceless, it's, you know, the security that's involved. I mean, it was without a doubt a full-time job. So a little bit more about the statuary process. It was designed by Nilda Comos, and what a lot of people don't realize is the process you go through and the requirements of approval that you go through. So Nilda started with a model that was 1 foot tall, and that model she made in her studio in Fort Lauderdale. And then she took that model carefully to Italy, to her studio in Pietrasanta. Pietrasanta, Italy is at the base of the Carrara Mountains. It's where Michelangelo carved his statue of David in the Pieta. It's an amazing, amazing place. It's considered the sculpture capital of the world. And Nilda's had a studio there for over 25 years. And the Cervietti studio, owned by Franco Cervietti, where she sculpted the statue, is the same, in fact, foundry that Michelangelo worked in as well. And the statue of David stands there, the plaster mold, the plaster, you know, there's only one, and it has to be reviewed by the country of Italy every year. So if anything ever happened to his statue in Florence, they have that plaster statue. That's right there, you know, when you walk in the door. It was unbelievable to me. But anyway, so then what happened was there's this 10-step process that I told you about, that the Library of Congress and the architect of the Capitol, the people who run the Capitol and oversee all of the statues, all of that, they created this 10-step process. So all of what we did had to be constantly approved through the state of Florida, submitting documentation to the Library of Congress and the architect of the Capitol. So what's required is for Nilda had to create a 2-foot maquette. That's a clay representation of the statue. That had to be approved. Then she created a 4-foot. That had to be approved. Then she created an 8-foot. That had to be approved. And then she created a plaster of that clay maquette, because the clay goes back into the clay pit. It's not saved, but the plaster is. And so the plaster is considered an original. That's why that statue of David plaster is so incredibly valuable at the Trivietti studio. But anyway, so she went through all of that, and we went through it as a team, but it was always just such a relief to get that letter of approval. But you can imagine this took months. And we've been working on this since 2018, and it's 2022. So it's been a long journey, but a wonderful journey. But she's just an amazing woman. And the thing that I loved about her most in 2018 when I met her is she said, I have worked my entire life for this moment. Isn't that beautiful? That she has done so much. She's a beautiful, gifted sculptor, and she does work in bronze and marble, and she paints in acrylic and watercolor and oil. And she said, I've worked my whole life for this moment, for this opportunity. And so just a little bit more about Nilda. She went to the Library of Congress and researched Mary McLeod Bethune. One of the other beautiful things she said, and if you listen to recordings of Mary McLeod Bethune, you know, she has a very firm, deliberate intonation and delivery in her speech. She would talk like this. This is what democracy means to me. And she was very deliberate in her speech making, and she really caught your attention, and just really gave you that sense that she had no ill will, despite the racial bigotry that she must have endured personally. She had a firmness about her, but sort of a gentleness about her, where she understood that building bridges was a better way to go than forcing her ideals on people who perhaps weren't open to those ideals. So she was just an amazing inspiration. And Nilda studied her and really captured that in the statue. And at one point, Nilda said, you know, I fell in love with her. I fell in love with who Mary McLeod Bethune was. I fell in love with her voice. And so, you know, Mary McLeod Bethune, so many people don't know, but when she left Palatka and came down to Daytona Beach, it was because she realized there was an opportunity, because we were building the railroads, and so there were a lot of African-American individuals working on the railroads, and they had children who didn't have the opportunity to get an education, and that's why it brought her to Daytona Beach. And so here she was in 1904 with $1.50 and 5 little girls to teach, and she started a school. And that grew into Bethune-Cookman University. So imagine in 1904 starting a school, and then imagine living through the transitions and the growth to say that in 1924 we are now a college. And that's just, it's an amazing feat. But then she went on to do amazing work for 5 different US presidents, particularly President Roosevelt. So she worked with FDR on what he called, and she called, and Eleanor Roosevelt called the Black Cabinet. And so she always had President Roosevelt's ear, and the way she had his ear was through her relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt would say, Mr. President, I think you want to talk to Mary McLeod Bethune. And so he would make sure that those two, and she was on a monthly basis in the White House during his tenure as president. And that's why when you see her statue, she's holding a walking stick. that walking stick was President Roosevelt's walking stick, and it was given to Mary McLeod Bethune after his death by Eleanor Roosevelt. So she also knew that collaboration and there was strength in numbers. And so she would bring organizations that represented African Americans together as groups, and it was one of the reasons she founded the National Council of Negro Women, because it's a council of many organizations. And she said, you know, we can do more together than we can separately, so let's come together. She would often, in her house on Vermont Street in Washington, D.C., she would have every Friday afternoon, she would have tea with different people, someone who represented the African American Pullman's Union, someone that represented the National Association of Colored People. She would have different people who would come to her home, and they would talk about what they could do collaboratively and with the synergy of all of those organizations to move the platform of civil rights and social justice forward. And that whole idea of all that the New Deal under President Roosevelt encompassed regarding equal employment opportunity for all people, but especially for African Americans and for women, was spearheaded by Mary McLeod Bethune. So, you know, she certainly changed our nation. So a little bit about Pietrasanta, I already mentioned. It sits in the northern Tuscany at the base of the Italian Alps. That Carrara marble that comes from there, and the Statuary marble is quarried there. Nilda Komos was able to get the final block of marble. There's Nilda down there. She was able to get the final block, 11.5 tons of marble in one single block. It was the final block to be quarried out of Michelangelo's cave. So it's beautifully significant in that sense that 505 years ago, he quarried that huge block of marble for the statue of David, and now we have quarried for the last and final time, because the cave is closed now to a large excavation. We have the marble for Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And Nilda will tell you, because people have asked us, you know, people have asked us about Martin Luther King's statue, if you've seen that in Washington, D.C. People have said, well, why was he made in white marble? Right? Why was an African American? And Nilda will tell you, because she's been asked that question, she said, creating, she calls it a portrait of a statue, creating a portrait in statuary marble. She'll say it with this, I've heard her say it so many times, I can say it just like she does. That is the most prestigious honor you can give someone, is to create their portrait in statuary marble, because it's the finest statuary medium that you can work in. And so thus Martin Luther King is in statuary marble, and so is Mary McLeod Bethune. So there's that block of 11.5 tons that she had. That was, we were offered 3 times that, what we paid for that, to let that go. Someone else wanted to carve in it, and we said, oh, no. There's the pictures of Nilda at the maquette. You see the 4-foot maquette and the 8-foot maquette? And that's, and then this is, again, there's pictures of Nilda with all the steps along the way. Those are, you know, she also, as I mentioned, we had her commissioned to create a bronze statue. So from that same maquette, we have a bronze statue and a marble statue. The bronze statue is what's going to be unveiled on August 18th at 9 a.m. in Riverfront Esplanade in downtown Daytona Beach. Both are considered original pieces of art, of course. And so, so it's another masterpiece will be right here in our Daytona Beach area. There she is again, working on her maquettes. More photos of the maquette and then of the plaster. You can see she's working on the cane, the walking stick there. There's a small picture of some of the actual elements of the statue that she looked at in order to know how to sculpt and what she wanted to sculpt. And then there's that beautiful black rose. So the story of the black rose is Mary McLeod Bethune was chosen as one of the original delegates for the United Nations. A lot of people don't know that, and that's hugely significant in and of itself. And when she was over in Bern, Switzerland, she was taken to a rose garden, and in the rose garden was this multitude of colors of roses. And one was this very deep burgundy black. And she said, this is God's diversity. This is how the world should live. This is all of us as different colors growing and thriving together. And that's how the world should be. We should all live in one garden and appreciate each other's colors. And so it made a big impact on her. When she came back to the United States, she began to call her students her Black Roses. And so here are just different elements of the statue, the shoes that she wore. And on the stack of books, I don't know if any of you have read her last will and testament, but if you haven't, it's the most beautiful document. It's kind of like, to me, the Gettysburg Address, you know, the Declaration of Independence. They're timeless documents. Her last will and testament is clearly a timeless document. And if you do anything from my speaking today, it's that you'll Google and read her last will and testament. I really should have handed it out. And I don't believe it's actually in the commemorative magazine, because that's filled with stories of our journey to the to National Statuary Hall. But in her last will and testament that she wrote before she died, it says, I leave you. And she talks about all the things that she wants us to carry forward after she's gone. And she describes each one of these, but the tenets of this last will and testament are printed, some of them are printed on the spines of the books that create the third leg stability of the statue. I leave you peace, I leave you love, I leave you racial dignity, I leave you courage, I leave you the desire to live harmoniously with one another, I leave you a thirst for education, and finally, I leave you the responsibility to our young people. She has all of those described in her last will and testament, and it's just a beautiful guideline of, you know, of perhaps how we could all live. And so that's just a little example of the way in which Nilda described that. On the very front of the statue, our board was asked to decide which quote would be the best quote, and there's so many from Mary McLeod Bethune, but we decided on invest in the human soul. Who knows, it may be a diamond in the rough. And so that's all it's in beautiful gold leaf, which reminds us of the sunshine of Florida. So that's kind of perfect too. And then just a few milestones that I wanted to mention that I alluded to earlier. Bringing that statue in October to the Daytona News Journal Center was a real feat and a beautiful opportunity for the schools of Volusia County, the school children of Volusia County to come see it. We had a number of field trips and field study programs. We had 15,000 people come. Then we took her to Maysville and had a beautiful ceremony with Majority Whip James Clyburn and 200 or 300 individuals. In a town of 500, it was quite a sight. And then, of course, we had the unveiling. This was a scene from Pietrasanta, the unveiling and dedication by the mayor of Pietrasanta. So that was the first time that the statue was viewed in its entirety. And then those are scenes from Pietrasanta and the blessing. And then this was the News Journal unveiling, so the News Journal Center unveiling. So we had special events there. It was a beautiful opportunity for our community to celebrate this milestone. We had lots and lots of support, as I mentioned, over 460 individual donations and a huge number of corporations and individuals and government agencies who supported the statue. And then on to Statuary Hall. I said, hopefully, it happened, but when I created this before we left last week, I hadn't. And then we're planning to unveil, as I mentioned, the bronze statue on August 18th in Esplanade Park, and that's a visual of Esplanade Park. And so we're also planning a documentary. It premieres at the News Journal Center that same night, August 18th at 6 p.m. You're all welcome to come. And then those are the ways in which you can participate. We have raised the money, so I don't have to say your donations are welcome because we've raised the money, so don't worry, I'm not passing the hat. We are done. But and our 501c3 will sunset at the end of this year. But I just wanted to show you a couple slides from last week if I made it close. So this is the slide of the crate that has the statue in it, going up on the east side of the Capitol. So the east side goes right into the rotunda. That's where the dome is. So you can see it came from a flatbed truck up, and they slipped it right in between those two columns. It was unbelievable. Then there are the gentlemen rolling the statue into National Statuary Hall. There is the hoist that's hoisting the statue up onto its pedestal. All of this happened between 4 o'clock and midnight on Friday, July 8th. And I was thrilled to be allowed to be in there. And it was interesting to only be one of about 15 people in the US Capitol all by ourselves. It was a unique experience. And then that is the unveiling the next day and the dedication. I was thrilled to be able to speak in National Statuary Hall. That is Representative Kathy Castor. She's a Democrat in Tampa. She is clearly the biggest advocate of this statuary process. This statue would not have happened without her devoting an immense amount of time and energy from her and her staff. She came into Tallahassee to meet with Rick Scott, to meet with Governor DeSantis. She gave us so much of her staff's time and energy along this journey. She really spearheaded this, and it began in 2006 when she was first elected. She came for her first tour of the U.S. Capitol, and she said, you know, I wanted to see the Florida statues. So they took her to John Bory, and she goes, and where is, you know, who is the other statue? And of course, they're like, oh. And so they took her to Kirby Smith, and she said, wow, we got to do something about this. So she's been working on this moment since 2006. She's really been the person who's championed this effort. And so I can't, of course, say enough about her. And then, of course, a view of Statuary Hall, and then there's Nilda and me after the unveiling with a sigh of relief. And there's an up-close view of the statue and the Black Rose. Thank you very much. You want me to stay for questions or anything? Or,
yes, sure. You're welcome to have a chat now. We have questions.
Yes, you were looking so attentive back there, by the
Yes,
way.
I was loving this. I just wanted to ask you, how did you get in the position to do what you were able to do?
Oh, thank you.
Teach at the college?
No, I wish I did though. I've been thinking about getting a PhD. It's kind of like, what do I want to do when I grow up, you know?
Exactly.
But right now, what I do is really just volunteer. I was a trustee at Bethune-Cookman University, and so in 2018, so they asked me to spearhead this project as a part of Bethune-Cookman. But then they went through, as you know, some troubles, and so we voted at the August 8th, 2018 meeting to form a separate 501c3 organization. So then we chose different people from the community to represent us because we felt that was imperative in case in case there was a lack of public trust regarding, you know, financially. So we said, let's just have a very independent 501c3. So that's how we started, and here we are today.
Just a follow-up, but you're white.
Yes, I am. Darn it.
How did that,
Yes, how did it all work? Yes, I know.
Was there a lot of conflict?
You would think, but there wasn't. I think there wasn't. I think the reason why there wasn't is because we had a large number of African Americans on our board, that we were very transparent, that we were very unified, that we made sure that we had consensus, you know, or open discussion along the way all the time. So I think that helped. I do think that people know, you know, who know me, know what's in my heart,
Yeah.
you know, and so I think that helped. And having worked a long time at Bethune-Cookman, you know, just as a volunteer, I think people already knew where I stood, you know, that they knew where my heart was. I think that absolutely helped. And like I said, we had just this beautiful mix of people, you know, men, women, black, brown, white, you know, just a very diverse group. That really helped. You know, I do think that sort of it's also kind of symbolic, though, that, you know, that she's black and I'm white, meaning Mary McLeod Bethune, because, you know, it's just important for people who look like me to say she is the greatest Floridian in our history. And all of us need to be saying that, in my opinion, but if I'm in that position where I can say that, you know, and really I'm just a community, I'm a community enthusiast, because we sold our funeral homes and cemeteries about, 10 years ago. And I was really, I worked all the time at Lohman Funeral Homes, you know, 10, 12 hours a day, weekends, you know, just all the time. I mean, when I would get a call and someone lost a loved one, I sprung into action, of course, to be there. And it was a huge privilege to be a part of these amazingly tender moments in families' lives, as you can imagine, you know. But it gave, after we sold the funeral homes, it was this opportunity to give back. And so I've just been working to give back. So I'm involved in the Halifax Humane Society and the Orma Memorial Art Museum and Gardens. I led those 2 campaigns to renovate both of those buildings and the campuses. And I'm the chair of the Council on Aging. And so I just, you know, give back where I'm passionate. And this has definitely been something I've been passionate about.
Fabulous.
Thanks. But I would like to teach one day, I think. All my family are teachers, so I've been thinking about going back to school. I never stop learning, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yes, did she have any children and were they part of this project?
That's a loaded question. That is an interesting question. This was the interesting story.